So in answer to the question, what have you learned about technologies from the process of constructing this product? I've learned a lot, firstly, in terms of equipment. I've learned how to use the Sony HD Handycams that we have access to in the Media Suite. I've learned how to use the software in the Apple Macs, the video converter, GarageBand. I've learned how to use certain aspects on the camera, such as white balance, which is very important for when recording footage, because if it's not all the same standard of light, it can be very difficult, and it means you've just got to do extra editing in the editing suite to make sure they're all the same. I've learned a lot of terms and how to use them in the sense of camera work, such as transitions like panning or tilting or arcing, and how the camera moves across and up and down. I had to learn about camera shots and the sort of different ones, the higher angle, the lower angles, and how they can reflect upon status in thriller conventions. The thing I've learned probably most about would be the editing and how you can manipulate footage, time, pace, sequence to give a desirable effect. So, for example, the type of cuts that you do, you can do a fade, you can do a wipe, you can do a dissolve, you can do just a normal standard cut, and these all can mean different things. For example, in our thriller we've used a lot of cuts, ranging from fast cuts to very slow cuts. The fast cuts create a lot of create a sense of pace, and because they're fast, they're quickening the pace of the sequence, therefore building climax, creating tension, and the audience can see that it's building towards something, and therefore they become tense as well. What did I just say? Oh, and we've used a lot of fades as well in our production, because these are quite conventional for a thriller. Fade to black creates mystery, enigma, what's the next shot going to be, etc. I've also learnt the methods of sound editing, and how you can manipulate a sound. You can fade them into each other, which is what we've done in our film. We've used two soundtracks, and we've overlapped them slightly so that they blend in towards each other, how it does sound like they are slightly separate but not too noticeable, and therefore this is effective because it's very subtle change, and therefore the audience don't realise it until after it's happened, and they already realise that the action is changing. The second soundtrack is a lot more sinister, it's higher pitched, and it creates a larger feeling of unease rather than the low tones that we use in the first one, which create more of an atmosphere for our thriller, and it's very good for the very, very opening of our opening sequence. While the second one, because of its high pitched, I think piano chords is used, it creates more of a climax, which is what we're intending to towards the end of our film. Further on the editing, I've learned how to do titling sequences and how to put them onto a film. Titling, editing titles is very important. It can either make or break your film, and you can either use a very boring, bland sort of way that just appears on screen. However, that's not exactly effective for the audience. So, for example, in our product, we've done it so that as the main female protagonist runs across the screen in the shot, the words flow after her. Well, not flow, but they appear after her. So therefore, it gives a sense that the female is more in control, because she's controlling when she runs. Therefore, she's controlling when the editing titles appear on screen. Therefore, it's slightly breaking conventions. You see her in a more independent way, rather than vulnerable, weak, which are what most female protagonists are presented as at the start of a thriller opening sequence. In regards to binary opposites and how the protagonist, usually male, is seen of higher status and power, whereas we've sort of flipped it a little bit on its way around. So yes, the editing titles were very important to learn, and we discussed in our groups sort of what font to use, sizes, possibly where they appear. We used the actual title of the film, The Uncharted, to appear on the bin bag, and then the bin bag is later used by the male antagonist. So therefore this shows a bit of foreshadowing, and how the bin bag is part of the iconography of the film, and it can denote certain codes to the audience about the type of film it's going to be and where the danger is going to be inflicted. Other things that we've learned, such as lighting in terms of technology, 3-point lights or low-key lighting. For our film we used quite low-key lighting due to the fact that it was quite a bright sunny day, so there wasn't a need for it too much as we used the natural light. However, in some shots there was a need for some background light behind because it was very dark, but given at a certain angle to still create an atmosphere and shadow. We used some lighting on the face as well when we were shooting in the shady parts, because it was sunny. There were obviously some very dark shades and shady parts and some very parts of the location that were sunny, so therefore in the shady parts we had to use some lighting on the face for the extreme close-ups in order to reveal more of the facial expression and to not lose any of those acting skills in regards to mise-en-scène for the audience. In terms of mise-en-scène, through technology and through watching thrillers, to learn the conventions of a thriller, and you can get a lot of different, you can get electronic boots and lots of things to do with technologies and costume. However, we didn't really use any of that. We didn't use any props that needed technology or electricity in that sense, because it wasn't appropriate for our thriller, so that we didn't really need to consider. For example, you could possibly have used a motorboat on the lake, but it wasn't necessary, therefore we didn't go there. Other things I've learned from mistake-wise is to definitely shoot enough footage, and we learned that from the prelim as well, and that because it's such a pain if you have to go back to the location a couple of days later or weeks later realising you don't have enough footage, and you've got to go back, and it may be a different weather, you may be looking slightly different, and in terms of continuity to keep that going, it's very hard, and you have to go through a lot of effort in the editing suite to make sure that it is in keeping in terms of continuity. So therefore we made sure we double checked again and again that we had enough footage on the day, that we weren't going to have to come back. So we shot shots that weren't necessarily in our storyboard beforehand, just in case we thought we might need it, did extra close-ups in case we needed more, extra extreme close-ups of the feet, the hands, the face, extra long shots, just in case one, our thriller wasn't long enough so we needed to include more footage, or two, we wanted more effects, we wanted more cross-cutting between the extreme close-ups, and therefore that's what I learned from that in terms of mistakes. I also learned, again, while mentioning it before, how to cross-cut and how to film all one side of the two locations and then the other side of the locations. Otherwise, if you're going back and forth between, it becomes very strenuous, very time-consuming, and it's not, in terms of a real film production, it's not very budgetable because you are wasting a lot of time, which obviously makes the product more expensive. So I learned how to cross-cut in that sense, and I also learned how to edit it in the suite, and how you take one bit of footage and drop it down, and edit it, shorten it, or and keep the desired part that you want to drop it down, and then to take the next bit from the other location, put it back down, possibly shorten it slightly if you wanted to get that effect of building a climax so that each shot becomes shorter and shorter and shorter, and then you finally build to the climax. I also learned how to desaturize the footage on on the effects on the software we were using. So we, instead of going to black and white, which we first had an idea of, as is demonstrated in our blog with the initial ideas of black and white, instead we just desaturated it, so it has got a bit of colour, and this gives a more old sort of stuck in time sense, and but that it's still realistic, because black and white makes it seem very not unrealistic, but in the sense of reality. Obviously we don't see in black and white, whereas sometimes we'll see on a very grey, dark day there's little colour, therefore we used desaturation. So it would seem more realistic, would seem more relatable to the audience, and therefore a more effective thriller. In terms of continuity techniques, I learned that it's very important, and so for example, when the female main protagonist is running down, and it's a long shot of her running over across the river, and then it cuts into her coming through the trees out to the lake, and then it cuts to behind her running through the gap in the trees out to the little platform by the lake. I had difficulty with that, because I had to make sure, in terms of continuity editing, that it was the same foot she landed on in both of the shots. And at first it wasn't, therefore it wasn't continuity, and I realised it after a while, so I had to go back and edit that a bit more, shave a little time off it to make sure they were matching up and the right foot was matching up to the on the different shots, and therefore it made it more smoother transition, a smoother cut, and a better quality editing. Other difficulties we had was obviously the weather on the day, the sunlight. We didn't think it was going to be sunny, because it had been very dreary weather leading up to that, and we thought, yes, that's perfect, we used the dreary weather. But unfortunately there was sunlight, so we had to desaturize it. However, that's how we resolved it. Instead of keeping it sunny, we did desaturize it, and in the end it did work out quite well, because it means there was a very large contrast between the colours in the film, therefore making certain things stand out, such as the shadows stand out more, the black leggings on the main female protagonist as her costumes stand out more, and the coat on the male protagonist stands out more against the background of the greyer desaturated colours. So it worked out well for us in that sense, and that's how we resolved it. Another difficulty we faced was we didn't plan the costume too well, so we had to sort of improvise on the day with what costumes we had available in our wardrobes. So we used a dark brown top of Michael Ashmore's that we found, and leggings of his sister's. So it was very improvised. However, we did plan a bit before, but we sort of pushed it inside and forgot on the actual day to bring costume with us, so we had to improvise that day. However, it did work out alright, because fortunately we had a big Timberland coat for the male antagonist, and we had certain appropriate clothing for the female protagonist of our desired effect. We wanted to make her a bit more ordinary and plain to appeal to the female audience, and therefore it was created because of luckily we had those costumes available. And finally, the end difficulty that we faced was, unfortunately, our third team member, Ellie, was unable to join us that day for shooting the footage. So it was just me and my other teammate, Michael Ashmore. And therefore it was very difficult. There were certain shots we couldn't do. We wanted to do 2 over-the-shoulder shots when we were both across the lake, so that you'd have that meeting point of us and our eye contact, and we'd finally, as characters, the cross-cutting would be building up to us meeting, and we finally meet eye to eye with 2 extreme facial close-ups of the eyes. But unfortunately we couldn't have an overshot of one person, the other person there, and no third person to actually hold the camera and film, and it was too difficult for me to hold it behind my shoulder to see Michael over on the other side of the lake and me here. So we had to cut those shots out, even though they were in the storyboard. However, we feel that the film, the sequence still works towards the end. It's still building towards a climax. There was probably less desired shots that we wanted. yet we adapted and we made it work. We did a few more extreme close-ups of the face and the eyes to make it more intriguing into the characters. We did more panning shots of the lake that we hadn't originally planned to do, to make it more interesting and to reveal the setting more, intrigue the audience as to why we've chosen a lake, and that would obviously come further on within the plot story and the narrative sequence. Certain things, like we also learn about ellipses in the editing suite. So on the titling, on the editing titles, there's a certain ellipsis of her running, because there's 4 shots of her running past the editing titles, yet there's a sense of time passing, because although they look like a similar shot, although they look like a similar shot, they are in fact different shots, and it's showing her running to different locations. However, it also, another interpretation implies that she's slightly stuck in time, because the shots and the setting in the shots are very, very similar. Therefore, we're sort of experiencing time passing a lot, and therefore it's making it go quicker even though we are stuck in a state. So it manipulates time, the ellipses manipulate time that we learnt about and have applied to our thriller opening. And I think that's it. Thank you.